my friends. Another day closer to my goals, I guess, right? No, I know. Anyway, this whole Charlie Kirk thing has me thinking, and I went through, I liked Charlie Kirk. I liked his content. I liked his debating skills. I'm not going to do the disclaimer. I didn't agree with everything he said. Well, duh. I don't agree with everything I said yesterday. Sometimes, never mind what another human being believes and thinks and says, right? Of course, I'm not going to agree with someone 100%. That would be crazy town. But anyway, I went through all the emotions, right? When it happened, my son, as soon as I saw the video, my son had texted me, was like, "Did you hear about Charlie Kirk? He got shot, blah, blah, blah." And, we had a back and forth conversation. He's not a fan of Charlie Kirk, but he knows that I was. And, he was like, "Sorry, blah, blah, blah." I was like, "Wow, I really liked him." And he's like, "Yeah, I know, Dad. I'm really sorry." And I'm like, "It's all right. It is what it is." And I was so angry, and I probably even reposted some memes about this is war. This means war. And I saw this quote, although it was only a small curated part of the cloak, about how Jesus said to sell your robe and buy a sword, and then I heard a man break that down yesterday, the whole verse, right, the whole thing, and it was way different than what I thought it was about, right? But the funny thing is, I just saw that video yesterday, but I had already gone through the stages, just like in, what is it, Matthew 23, something like that. I'm not a biblical scholar, so I might have the number wrong, but it's in Matthew. Anyway, and like as I was watching the video, I realized I basically had gone through the metamorphosis that Jesus was talking about, that Matthew was talking about, that Jesus was saying in that passage. And it was kind of lucky, right? Because at first I was like, war, this means, there's no more talking, this, that, and the other thing. And then, like, I'm a follower of the faith, right? Jesus Christ. And so I was thinking, I'm like, well, what would Charlie Kirk say to that, right? What would, and only the version that I know of him, right? I said, what would Jesus say about that, And then this verse was shown to me a week later. But so as the week was progressing, I was getting a little softer about, this is war, don't talk to anybody, blah, 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 right? I was like, well, that's not going to help anything. It's not going to help me. It's definitely not going to help my children and their future. And my son had sent me a series of videos, and he goes, "This is why I'm liberal," right? So I was like, my son had come out to me as liberal, and he's 16. He's in public school, whatever. And I was very liberal leaning. In fact, I was probably far left, probably even further left than a lot of people on the left. I would have been one of those people making a celebratory video of a man's demise. And I have. I mean, you could probably find them on my social media, go back several years. I mean, even when I was like talking, well, anyway, I've done it all, right? I've done it all. I understand it. I do. I understand the anger, the rage, right? But like, I tempered myself. Even the video I made the day of, right after learning of the assassination, my video was tempered, right? I was disciplined in my words for the most part. But my son saying that to me, made me rethink the whole, this is war, there's no talking to these people, blah, 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 I'm done. Because he's my son. I love my son, And so I had several days until he came back from his mom's house, because, his mom and I are divorced. He spends half his time over there, half his time over here. Same thing with my daughter, but my daughter's in college right now. Anyway, so when I went to pick him up, we had a conversation about liberalism, about conservatism, about Charlie Kirk, about political violence, beliefs, socialism, capitalism, I could have, what was I supposed to do? Was I supposed to yell at him? Was I supposed to tell him that he was stupid, that he doesn't know anything? He's just a 16-year-old kid and his viewpoint isn't valid and this and that and blah, 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 blah. No, but I prayed. I prayed for discipline of my tongue, disciplines of my words, my actions, my behavior. I prayed to have the right words, even if I didn't know at the time, in order to address the situation with my son. Not that it was a major situation, but I wanted to have a conversation with him because, we've seen so many times these young kids raging against their parents, their families, their communities, their household. And like, I love my son, right? I can't talk down to him like that. I want the best for him. I want the best for my daughter, and I truly believe that God had put this situation in my life for me to choose what I wanted to do with it. How did I want to react to my child, right? And aren't we God's children, right? How would God react to his child, thinking the opposite of what he thinks, or believing the opposite, or feeling a certain way, right? He would address it with love and understanding and discipline of the tongue, right? Discipline of your emotions. And we had a great conversation. I don't think I changed his mind per se, but I showed him that through talking, through sharing ideas, we could understand each other a little bit better, right? And we see it time and time again. The parents rage against the kid rages against the parents, and then the kid's on their own, no training wheels, just out there. When I was my son's age, 16 years old, I'm coming up on my 55th birthday. My 15th birthday and my 16th birthday and my 17th birthday was spent in juvenile facilities, for violence. All right. I was somewhat of an anarchist back then, criminal, degenerate. I had a good time, don't get me wrong, but I had to spend a lot of time behind bars. I want the best for my children. I don't want them to suffer the same things that I suffered. And so I have to change the person that I brought into fatherhood, and shouldn't that be how we look out, to people that disagree with us, right? I'm not saying that you look down on them as your child. I'm saying you look on them lovingly, like they're your child, right? As God would look on to you when you're fucking up, And I'm not saying that my son's fucking up. He's a very smart kid. He's he does well in school. He's very well-mannered, well-behaved. He's got a sarcastic attitude. He's funny, a little inappropriate, which I like. And, isn't that how we have to look at each other as brothers and sisters, sons and daughters? Love thy neighbor like you love thyself. I didn't even love myself, right? I didn't know what love was until I had my children. And I didn't always show it properly. I wasn't always available to them in the way that I feel that I should have been looking back. I was always there, but, emotionally, I was mean. I was on drugs, for a big chunk of their childhood, I've made many mistakes. I would have been one of these people crashing out online, talking trash. And, the lesson that I got from having this conversation with my son, and also, a conversation I had with my daughter when she was going through some issues because she's in college now, and, it's all new to her as well. But anyway, and there wasn't political or anything. It was more, anyway, it doesn't really matter. But, that's what I'm saying, right? We have to look at each other as brothers and sisters, right? As our sons and daughters, at least respect-wise. No one deserves to be killed over their viewpoint. Does some people have atrocious viewpoints? Sure. Charlie wasn't one of them, though. And the people who say that he was, never really saw him, never really watched him. But hey, man, everybody have a great day.